Have you ever, look at a massive river delta from above?
Oh, yeah, like from a plane or satellite photos or something?
Exactly. It's just wonderfully chaotic, right? You have hundreds of these little streams branching off.
Right, and they merge, and then they split again.
Yeah, exactly. Absorbing water from a dozen different sources, constantly shifting its banks. I mean, it doesn't have one clear, rigid direction.
No, not at all. And that's fundamentally its nature, right? It's a diffuse system.
Right. And it survives and thrives over millennia precisely because it's so decentralized. It's endlessly adaptable.
There's no central authority dictating where every drop of water goes.
Exactly. So now I want you to imagine waking up one day and seeing that entirely chaotic, pluralistic river delta suddenly reorganizing itself.
Like just out of nowhere.
Yeah, imagine all those diverse streams suddenly snapping together into like a single straight hyper-pressurized canal.
Oh, wow. That's quite an image.
Right. A disciplined, unyielding torrent with strict concrete walls. You would stand there looking at it and wonder, how on earth did that happen?
How did an ecosystem defined by its capacity to absorb differences suddenly become this militant, unified thing?
Exactly. How did it forge itself into an exclusionary structure? That is the absolute definition of a sociological paradox.
It really is. And, you know, in the realm of political science and history, it's one of the most fascinating questions of the last century.
And that paradox, that's our central mission today for this deep dive. We are unpacking a really massive, academically rigorous text.
Yeah, it's a huge one today.
It is. We are taking a deep dive into Christophe Jaffrelot's landmark book, The Hindu Nationalist Movement in India.
But before we dive into the mechanics of all this identity formation, we really have to lay down some clear ground rules for you listening at home.
Yes, absolutely crucial. We are dealing with historically and politically charged material today.
Very charged.
So let me be unequivocally clear here. Our mission today is not to take a side. We are not here to endorse any political viewpoint. And we are certainly not here to, pass moral judgments on the actors or the history involved.
Whether you personally lean left, right, or center, our goal is purely impartial.
Exactly. Analytical. We are simply here to report on and analyze the historical and sociological framework that Jaffrelot uses.
Think of us as tour guides, basically, walking you through the architecture of this incredibly complex ideology.
We are looking strictly at the mechanics, the how and the why of this specific political identity.
Viewed exclusively through the lens of this one text.
Yeah.
And, I mean, to understand the text, you really need to understand the author, Christophe Jaffrelot.
Right. Who is he? Because this isn't just a casual history book.
No, not at all. He's a highly respected French scholar. He wrote his PhD under the eminent political scientist Jean Le.
Oh, okay.
And he didn't just, sit in a library in Paris to write this.
Mm-hmm.
He conducted incredibly extensive granular fieldwork in India.
Right. Specifically in the central state of Madhya Pradesh, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. And he originally published this work in French back in 1993 and then updated it for a broader English release in 1996.
I really want to emphasize the sheer density of this book to you guys because it is intimidating.
No, it's a brick.
It's a brick of pure data. The scholar Craig Baxter reviewed it and basically said it's so crammed full of dense data and theory
that it functions better as a reference work, right?
Yeah, better as a vital reference work than a standard textbook for an undergrad class.
Baxter's assessment is spot on. I mean, Jaffrelot isn't just giving you a timeline of election results or listing famous politicians.
Right.
He applies a very specific sociological method to decode over a century of history. He uses the theory of ethnic nationalism.
Right, which draws heavily on the sociologist Anthony Smith, yeah.
Exactly.
Let me stop you there, though, because if I'm a listener, I'm already bumping up against the academic jargon here.
Fair enough.
What is the actual difference between ethnic nationalism and the kind of nationalism we usually think of?
That is the foundational distinction for this entire discussion. When we typically hear nationalism in the West...
say, the French model or the American model.
Yeah, exactly. We're usually talking about territorial nationalism. That is a top-down approach.
Top-down, meaning starting from the government.
Right. A state is created, borders are drawn on a map, and then the state works downward to impose a shared identity on everyone inside those borders.
Regardless of their original cultural or linguistic background.
Exactly. The state machinery literally creates the nation.
So it's essentially saying, you live within these geographical lines, you pay taxes to this government, therefore you are part of our nation.
Yes. But ethnic nationalism, which is the framework Jaffrelot applies here, operates in the exact opposite direction.
No, it's bottom up.
Completely bottom up. It begins with a pre-existing cultural or religious unit that suddenly feels deeply threatened by outside forces.
Oh, interesting. So the national identity isn't mandated by a government.
No, it's forged by the cultural group itself as a defense mechanism to protect itself.
And Jaffrelot couples this big macro-level theory with his micro-local fieldwork, right?
Yeah, in Madhya Pradesh. He wanted to see how these grand, abstract ideas actually manifested in small, local districts.
And he observed what he calls cluster techniques.
Yes, cluster techniques.
Meaning how they gathered people locally.
Exactly. It's how a very small core of highly committed, ideologically pure activists would enter a new district and systematically co-opt local notables.
Like a local prince or maybe a wealthy merchant?
Or a respected elder, yeah. They used the notables' local influence to build a network, while the core activists maintained strict control over the ideology.
So he is literally examining the DNA of the movement, from the high philosophy down to the street-level organizing.
And Jaffrelot argues that this DNA is built on 3 core strategies.
Okay, I want to spend some real time on the first strategy here because it is the most fascinating.
And the most psychologically complex, honestly.
Right. He calls it stigmatization and emulation. Help me map this out in plain English for our listeners.
Okay, let's pull the 2 concepts apart. Stigmatization is the necessary first step.
Okay.
To forge this kind of identity, you first have to identify an external group and paint them as a threatening other.
And in the historical context of late 19th and early 20th century India, who was that?
Jaffrelot points to the perceived threats from British Christian missionaries and Islamic political mobilization.
Okay, so by highlighting, and I assume heavily exaggerating, the strength and aggressiveness of these external groups.
Exactly. The early nationalist leaders generated a profound feeling of vulnerability and inferiority among Hindus.
I see. So step 1 is pointing to the enemy at the gates and screaming, look how incredibly strong and united they are.
And look how dangerously divided and weak we are. It's manufacturing a crisis of confidence.
And that crisis of confidence leads directly to step 2, which is emulation.
Right. And this is where the paradox really takes root. To fight this threatening other, the movement secretly decides to borrow their strengths.
Wait. So they are looking at the people they despise, the people they are terrified of, and deciding to copy their homework?
That is the core of the strategy. They look at the hierarchical structure of Christianity, or the discipline of the British colonial forces.
And they realize, oh, we need those exact tools if we are going to survive.
Yes. But here is the psychological trap. You cannot just stand up in front of your followers and admit that you are copying the enemy.
Because that would be an admission of cultural defeat.
Exactly. It would completely validate the enemy's superiority.
It's like, think of a martial artist who keeps getting utterly defeated in the ring by a rival's brand new grappling technique.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Right. If he wants to survive, he has to secretly learn and copy that exact grappling move.
But his pride won't let him go back to his dojo and admit he's using the rival's move.
Exactly. He can't say, my moves don't work. So instead, he digs up some ancient, dusty scroll, tweaks the translation, and tells his students a story.
Actually, this grappling move is a lost technique from our own great-grandfather.
Yes. I'm not copying the rival. I'm just reviving our true ancient tradition.
That analogy captures the exact mechanism Jaffrelot describes perfectly. He calls that process the invention of the Vedic Golden Age.
The Vedic Golden Age. So to mask the embarrassment of emulation, they reinvent a distant, glorious past.
Right. They claim that these newly borrowed traits, like a unified, centralized structure, are actually ancient Hindu traditions.
Traditions that were just tragically forgotten or corrupted over centuries of foreign rule.
Exactly. They are radically innovating, but they are framing it entirely as a restoration.
It is brilliant from a purely strategic standpoint. You get the modern weapons you need, but you package them in the comforting blanket of ancient heritage.
So that's the first pillar, stigmatization and emulation.
We invent a threat, copy their strengths, and pretend it was ours all along. Okay, what are the other 2 strategies Jaffrelot identifies?
The second pillar is ethno-religious mobilization.
Which means what exactly?
It's the instrumental, highly calculated use of religious symbols, rituals, and sacred figures to rally the masses.
So utilizing modern gurus or sacred geography?
Exactly. It's taking the abstract ideology of ethnic nationalism and translating it into a visceral, emotional appeal that can cross class lines.
Taking the philosophy out of the armchair and weaponizing it in the streets.
That's a great way to put it. And the third pillar is what sustains the movement when those street protests end. Jaffrelot calls it the Sangathanist organization.
Sangathan simply translates to organization or unity, right?
Right. This refers to the physical, human architecture of the movement. The patient, grueling work of building a hierarchical network of grassroots activists.
People who dedicate their entire lives to the cause. The unglamorous work of long-term party building.
Exactly.
Okay, I have the blueprint in my head now. You create the identity by feeling threatened and secretly copying strength stigmatization and emulation.
Right.
You rally the general public using sacred symbols, ethno-religious mobilization.
Yes.
And you sustain the momentum over generations with a disciplined army of local volunteers, the Sangathanist organization.
That is the complete sociological framework. And Jaffrelot argues that to understand modern India, you trace these three strategies interacting over a century.
Then let's do exactly that. The outline takes us back to the genesis of all this, which Jaffrelot locates in the late 19th century.
We're deep in the era of British colonial rule at this point.
Right. The British aren't just ruling politically, they are exerting immense cultural pressure. And this is where we meet a figure named Swami Dayananda.
Swami Dayananda founded a socio-religious reform movement called the Arya Samaj in 1875.
And he provides our first major documented case study in stigmatization and emulation, doesn't he?
He absolutely does. He was reacting directly to British colonial rule, but more specifically to the influx of Christian missionaries.
Because these missionaries were aggressively mocking Hindu practices.
Right. They criticized the polytheism, the idol worship, and above all, the rigid birth-based hierarchy of the caste system.
Now, I would imagine the natural defensive reaction for a traditionalist would be to stubbornly defend everything the missionaries attacked.
To just dig your heels in.
Yeah, to say, our way is perfect, go away.
Many did just that. But Dayananda was different. He actually agreed with some of the Western criticisms.
Really?
Yeah. He felt that contemporary Hindu practices had become corrupted over time. So he criticized the very things the missionaries mocked.
But he still fiercely defended the core of Hindu civilization.
Exactly. And here is where we see the emulation mechanism activate. He looked at Western values of individualism and meritocracy.
The things the British prided themselves on.
Right. And he reinterpreted the ancient Hindu Varna system, the caste system, as a purely meritocratic social order.
Hold on, let me make sure I'm mapping this correctly. Because the caste system, for centuries, was fundamentally based on birth.
Yes.
You were born into a caste, and that dictates your social standing, your profession, your purity.
Correct.
So Dayananda is taking a system based entirely on birth, retrofitting it with Western concepts of individual merit, and claiming...
He's claiming, no, the British have it wrong, and modern Hindus have it wrong. In the Vedic Golden Age, caste was based on your personal merit and actions.
Oh, wow. You hit on the exact mechanism there. He is borrowing the cultural features of the threatening other Western meritocracy.
But presenting this radical innovation as a recovery of an ancient, authentic tradition.
It's the martial arts analogy playing out perfectly in 1875.
It really is.
It's a fascinating intellectual sleight of hand, but... You know, as we move forward into the 1920s, the threatening other changes, doesn't it?
It does. The movement shifts from reacting against the British to reacting against Muslim mobilization.
The book highlights the Khilafat movement as a major trigger for this.
Right. The geopolitical context shifts after World War I. There was a perceived rise in Muslim organizational cohesion globally and within India.
Specifically surrounding the Khilafat movement, which sought to preserve the Ottoman Caliphate.
Exactly. And for the Hindu elites, this perceived cohesion was terrifying, especially when it was punctuated by events like the Malabar riots in 1921.
Where Muslim peasant mobilization turned violently against Hindu landlords, right?
Yes. And this violence triggered a massive, profound inferiority complex among upper caste Hindus.
An inferiority complex. I'm struggling with that phrasing a bit. Why would they feel inferior if they were just attacked? Wouldn't they just feel angry?
Well, it wasn't just anger. It was a deep sense of structural vulnerability. Jaffrelot points to a Hindu leader named B.S. Munji.
Okay, who was he?
He wrote a detailed report on the Malabar riots. And Munji's report is a perfect artifact of stigmatization.
How so?
He heavily emphasized and arguably exaggerated the organizational solidarity and martial prowess of the Muslims.
Contrasting it with what he saw as the fragmented, divided nature of Hindu society.
Exactly. He used the riots to generate a feeling of existential weakness.
They are united, we are weak. The classic first step we talked about.
And his solution was social reform. Munji pushed for reforms within Hindu society, like reinterpreting marriage practices and promoting physical training.
To create a more unified, muscular Hindu society that could emulate the solidarity he saw in the Muslim community.
You got it.
So again, an external threat forces an internal reorganization, justified by pointing to the past.
Yes, but at this point in the timeline, this is still largely socio-religious reform. It's about changing societal habits.
Right, so when does this actually become a codified, hardline political ideology? Because that's the real leap.
That intellectual leap happens a few years later. The foundational text is written in 1923 and published in 1926.
By V.D. Savarkar.
Yes. The book is called Hindutva, who is a Hindu.
And Savarkar is the thinker who really imports the formal Western concepts of ethnic nationalism into the Indian context, right?
He is, and he was heavily influenced by German ethnic nationalism specifically.
That's a crucial point Jaffrelot makes.
Right. Savarkar needed a way to define the nation that wasn't just based on religion, because, interestingly, he himself was actually quite secular in his personal belief.
Wait, really? The father of this movement was personally secular?
Yeah. It's one of the great paradoxes. So he tied Indian identity to 3 rigid pillars instead of just theology, which were geographical unity, racial features, meaning a shared bloodline, and a common culture or civilization.
This is classic textbook ethnic nationalism.
Absolutely. And to solidify this identity, he stigmatized non-Hindus, specifically Muslims and Christians, by creating a test of loyalty.
How did the test work?
He argued that because their holy lands, Mecca or Jerusalem, were located outside the geographical borders of India, their ultimate loyalties would always remain outside of India.
So under Savarkar's definition, to be a true, authentic part of the nation, your fatherland, the place where you live, and your holy land had to be the exact same territory.
Exactly. If you look westward to Mecca for your prayers, Savarkar argued you were inherently suspect. You couldn't be fully Indian.
It is a complete internalization of ethnic nationalism. But, Savarkar, for all his influence, was primarily a theorist.
Right, he was writing books.
An ideology on a piece of paper cannot change a country. It needed an engine. It needed a physical organization to implement these ideas on the ground.
Which brings us to perhaps the most important organization we are going to discuss in this entire deep dive.
The RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh.
Founded in 1925 by K.B. Hedgewar, and later massively expanded by his successor, M.S. Golwalkar.
I was really struck by the specific language Jaffrelot uses here. He doesn't call it a political party or a militia. He calls the RSS a Hindu nationalist sect.
That phrasing, a sect, is vital. It explains everything they do subsequently.
How so?
Well, Hedgewar looked at the fragmented nature of Hindu society and realized they needed an incredibly disciplined, almost ascetic organization to overcome caste divisions.
So what does he emulate to achieve this incredible discipline?
He looks at the ultimate symbol of authority in his world at the time, the British military.
Wow.
The early RSS literally adopted khaki shorts and marching drills, copying the paramilitary style of the colonial police force.
Talk about stigmatization and emulation in its purest physical form. You despise the colonial occupiers. You feel threatened by them.
And your response is to literally put on their khaki shorts and march around in their formations.
It's mind-blowing. But, I mean, if they had just stopped there, they would have looked like absurd British impersonators.
Exactly. The emulation has to be masked, remember?
Yeah.
So they grounded these borrowed military features in deeply traditional Indian rituals.
Like what?
They structured their local branches around the model of the Akhara, the traditional Indian gymnasium focused on martial arts and ascetic physical discipline.
Oh, okay. I see.
They built the internal hierarchy around the deeply revered ancient guru-disciple relationship.
Ah, so they fused the mechanical discipline of a British military drill with the unquestionable spiritual authority of a traditional Indian guru.
It is a potent combination. And under the leadership of Golwalkar, this evolved into a millenarian project.
Meaning they were playing a very long game.
The longest game. The RSS was not a political party trying to win a local election next Tuesday. They operated on a generational timeline.
Their goal was to fundamentally transform Hindu society from within, right? Through patient character building.
Yes. They've used every local RSS branch, the daily gathering known as the Shaka, as a Hindu Rashtra in miniature.
A tiny, perfectly controlled model of the utopian Hindu nation they wanted to build.
Exactly. A place where young men gathered at dawn, exercised together, and formed bonds of absolute solidarity that theoretically transcended any caste divisions.
Okay, here is where I have to push back a bit, because I was reading Jaffrelot's analysis, and that utopian vision seems to contain a massive, glaring contradiction.
Let's hear it.
The RSS claims their entire reason for existing is to unite all Hindus, to transcend the caste system, right?
Right.
But Jaffrelot points out that the early RSS was overwhelmingly upper caste. Its founders were specifically Maharashtrian Brahmins.
Yes, they were.
And the culture they promoted inside the Shaka was highly Brahminical and heavily Sanskritized. So if your goal is mass, egalitarian unity, how on earth does promoting an elitist upper caste culture help you appeal to the millions of lower caste Hindus you need to unite?
It seems like a massive contradiction. And frankly, it was a fundamental limitation that would haunt the movement for decades.
It had to be.
Jaffrelot observes that the RSS, despite its genuinely egalitarian rhetoric inside the Shaka, structurally ended up reproducing hierarchical social values.
Because their daily rituals and language were so thoroughly Brahminical.
Exactly. They naturally attracted mostly high-caste youth who felt comfortable in that cultural milieu.
So if the culture is that exclusive, how did they manage to recruit any lower caste members in those early formative years?
They relied on a sociological process called Sanskritization.
Sanskritization, what is that?
It's a phenomenon where lower caste individuals seek upward social mobility not by tearing down the caste system, but by emulating the customs of the upper castes.
Ah.
So a lower caste individual might join the local RSS Shaka specifically to acquire Sanskrit learning or adopt upper caste dietary habits.
It was a path to respectability for them.
Yes, but, and this is Jaffrelot's critical point, by engaging in Sanskritization, the lower caste members were validating and adopting the hierarchy, not dismantling it.
I see. So the RSS was ideologically trapped by the sociological realities of its own founding base.
Precisely. They built a ladder for people to climb, but they didn't tear down the walls.
That is a great way to put it. So they have this incredibly dedicated, disciplined, but sociologically limited cadre of young men.
Right.
Eventually, they realize they cannot just do morning drills forever. They have to enter the actual political arena to enact change.
So they create a political wing, the Parathiya Janasangh, or the BJS.
But the RSS leadership is terrified of being corrupted by the dirty game of electoral politics, aren't they?
Terrified. They want to maintain their pure ascetic identity, so they implement a unique system to control the politicians.
Right, the Sangathan mantras.
Yes, the organizing secretaries. These are full-time, highly trained, often celibate RSS workers who are essentially loaned out to the Janasangh.
They are injecting their most disciplined monks into the chaotic world of a political party to act as the backbone.
And Jaffrelot focuses heavily on his field work in Madhya Pradesh to illustrate how this operated locally.
This is where we see those cluster techniques in action again.
Exactly. A core group of these committed RSS activists would be dispatched to a new district. They wouldn't run for office themselves.
Instead, they would identify local notables, right? A local prince or a wealthy merchant.
And they would co-opt that notable, using his wealth and influence to win the votes of the local peasantry.
While the RSS men stayed in the background, maintaining strict, uncompromising control over the ideology.
It is a brilliant division of labor. The notable brings the popularity, the RSS brings the discipline.
But as they scale up, they immediately run into a brick wall at the national level. And his name is Jawaharlal Nehru.
They do. Nehru is the first prime minister of independent India, and he is a fierce, uncompromising secularist.
I want to talk about this clash with Nehru in the 1950s because it perfectly illustrates a major point in Jaffrelot's theory about state power.
Right, how state power affects ideological movements.
Exactly. The Hindu nationalists try to use their second core strategy, ethno-religious mobilization.
They try to manufacture a mass movement around the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya back in 1949 and 1950.
This is a huge precursor to the massive conflict later on. What happened in 1949?
Well, idols of Lord Ram were surreptitiously installed inside the Babri Mosque.
Okay.
And the Hindu Mahasabha political party, aligned with Hindu nationalism, tried to aggressively exploit this religious fervor to win votes.
But Nehru responded with absolute firmness.
Unwavering firmness. He utilized the full machinery of the state to shut it down. He refused to let the state apparatus be hijacked by communal politics.
And Jaffrelot concludes that because the state so firmly enforced secular norms, the strategy of using religion for votes completely failed to gain traction.
It did. And Nehru did something else that was politically masterful. He didn't just fight the nationalists from the outside, he starved them of oxygen from the inside.
By using what political scientists call the Congress system.
Yes. Nehru's Congress Party was an absolute behemoth. It was a massive umbrella organization.
And at the local level, it absorbed a tremendous amount of traditionalist Hindu sentiment.
Right. If you were a local politician who cared about traditional issues, like advocating for cow protection or promoting Hindi over English.
You didn't have to join the militant Jana Sangh. You could just stay within Nehru's Congress Party.
Exactly. Nehru tolerated these traditionalists at the local level, allowing them to exist and vent.
But he kept the central levers of power in New Delhi firmly, undeniably secular.
By doing this, he absorbed the energy of the traditionalists and denied the Jana Sangh exclusive political ownership of Hindu issues.
He practiced political judo. He used their own weight against them.
He really did.
So the Jana Sangh finds itself entirely marginalized in the 1950s. They have their disciplined cadres, but they absolutely cannot break through Nehru's secular fortress.
Which brings us to a major inflection point in the book.
Right. As we look at the 1960s, the movement has an existential crisis. They realize they cannot win on religious polarization alone.
Nehru proved that. They have to pivot or they will fade into obscurity.
So the political context dictates the evolution of their strategy. If secularism is the unbreakable norm, you have to adapt your message to survive.
And in the 1960s, we see the Jana Sangh actively dilute its core ethno-religious ideology. They shift their focus dramatically toward socioeconomic issues.
They try to reinvent themselves as the party of the middle world, as Jaffrelot puts it.
Right. They position themselves in direct opposition to Nehru's socialist economic interventions.
Like his push for cooperative farming.
Exactly. When Nehru proposes policies like that, the Jana Sangh violently opposes it. They suddenly position themselves as the ardent champions of the independent, small-scale farmer.
And the small-town merchant. They are telling the middle class, we are the only ones defending you against this creeping, centralized socialist state.
Exactly.
But I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of an RSS ideologue here. The RSS is not a chamber of commerce, right?
No, definitely not.
They're a cultural sect dedicated to building a Hindu nation. How on earth do they justify this sudden pivot to agricultural and economic policy?
They need a philosophical grounding for this, or they will look like total hypocrites to their own cadres.
Right. And that required philosophical grounding was provided by a thinker named Dinadal Upadhyay.
Yes, he formulates a doctrine called integral humanism.
And this philosophy is strategically brilliant, isn't it?
It is, because it heavily romanticizes the idea of traditional Indian village self-government.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Upadhyay argues against centralized state power, not just on cold economic grounds, but by claiming that true, authentic Indian culture is inherently decentralized.
He frames the village, not the state, as the core of Hindu civilization.
Exactly. This framework allows the Jana Sangh to oppose Nehru's modern socialism while sounding perfectly in tune with ancient traditional Hindu values.
That bridges the gap between economics and culture perfectly. We aren't defending capitalism, we are defending the ancient village.
It's very clever.
But they don't completely abandon the religious angle, do they? Because right in the middle of this economic pivot in the mid-1960s, we see the creation of a massive new organization.
The VHP, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad.
Which is formed in 1964, and it is a direct creation of the RSS, right?
Correct. The RSS leadership recognizes a structural weakness in Hinduism. Unlike Christianity, Hinduism lacks a centralized ecclesiastical structure.
There is no pope.
Exactly. It is incredibly diffuse, with thousands of independent sects and gurus, and the RSS wants to unify this chaotic religious landscape.
So the VHP is created specifically to bring together sadhus, gurus, and ascetics under one umbrella,
turning diffuse spiritual authority into a consolidated political weapon.
And the VHP immediately flexes its new muscles with the 1966 cow protection movement.
They launch a massive, highly emotive agitation in Delhi, demanding a total national ban on cow slaughter.
It's a pure, unadulterated display of ethno-religious mobilization.
Utilizing a deeply sacred symbol to rally massive crowds and put intense pressure on the government.
So we arrive at the critical 1967 elections, and the Jana Sangh deploys what Jaffrelot terms a mixed strategy.
Yes. They combine the fiery religious fervor of the cow protection movement with highly pragmatic, almost cynical electoral alliances.
They team up with socialists, and they team up with the conservative pro-business Swatantra Party, right?
Right, to form grand coalitions against the dominant Congress Party.
And it actually works. They break through and enter several state coalition governments.
They do.
But this raises a massive question for me about the psychology of this movement. We established that this movement was born out of the RSS, a sect obsessively dedicated to ideological purity.
Right, ascetic discipline, long-term character building.
So how does an organization built on that kind of puritanical rigidity survive the incredibly dirty transactional reality of coalition politics?
It's a great question.
You are sitting in a cabinet making deals with secularists and socialists whom you fundamentally despise.
You've identified the central tension that Jaffrelot explores in this era. And the answer is, they barely survive it. It nearly tears the movement apart.
It creates a massive structural internal conflict.
Exactly. On one side, you have the political leadership of the Janasangh, men who are finally tasting real power and are entirely willing to compromise to stay in office.
And on the other side,
you have the grassroots RSS activists, those ascetic Sangathan mantras we talked about earlier.
And they absolutely despise the ideological dilution they are witnessing.
They view every political compromise as a profound betrayal of the ultimate goal, the Hindu Rashtra.
It is the eternal conflict between the pragmatists sitting in the capital and the purists sweating in the grassroots.
And as we move into the 1970s, this tension goes from a low simmer to a ticking time bomb.
Jaffrelot describes this dynamic as a severe horizontal division within the movement.
It is not just two politicians fighting for control. It is the entire all-India political leadership clashing violently with their own local Sangathanist network.
Give me a concrete example of how this ideological civil war played out.
The best example is the clash between two major leaders, Raj Madhak and Atal Bihari Vajpayee, in the early 1970s.
Okay, set the scene. What did Madhak want?
Madhak was the president of the party at the time, and he wanted to pursue a strict, conservative, right-wing alliance strategy.
Allying with traditionalist landlords and capitalists.
Right. Vajpayee, on the other hand, pushed a highly populist approach.
Emphasizing social justice, land reform, economic equality.
Because he wanted to compete directly with Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who was sweeping the country with her massive Abolish Poverty campaign.
It's a battle for the soul of the party, the conservative establishment versus the populist. Who wins that tug of war?
Vajpayee wins. And it's crucial to understand why he wins.
Why does he win?
He wins because his populist approach, while perhaps less economically orthodox, resonated much better with the activist, egalitarian orientation of the grassroots RSS workers.
Ah, I see.
Madhak, despite being the senior leader and party president, is eventually isolated and expelled.
This proves one of Jaffrelot's most important points, doesn't it? In this movement, the organizational network, the RSS base, ultimately dictates the boundaries.
The base controls the establishment. Always.
Okay, then we enter one of the most fascinating, head-scratching eras in global political history. We are in the mid-1970s.
A very chaotic time.
Prime Minister Indira Gandhi is becoming increasingly authoritarian, protests are mounting, and who do the militant Hindu nationalists team up with to fight her?
Jayaprakash Narayan, affectionately known as JP, who is a committed Gandhian socialist.
It seems utterly bizarre on the surface. Why would right-wing Hindu nationalists ally with a Gandhian socialist?
Jaffrelot explains that JP's concept of total revolution, his emphasis on grassroots activism, actually shared unexpected deep affinities with the core RSS ideology.
Specifically, Danyal Upadhyay's integral humanism.
Exactly. They both believed in decentralizing power. And when Indira Gandhi declares the emergency in 1975,
suspending civil liberties, jailing opponents, explicitly banning the RSS.
All these disparate opposition groups are forcefully thrown together.
Literally thrown together in the same prison cells.
Exactly. And the emergency becomes a crucible for the RSS. With their organization banned, they go entirely underground.
They organize a massive satyagraha, a campaign of non-violent civil disobedience.
Tens of thousands of RSS volunteers deliberately court arrest, flooding the jails.
And this period builds immense, unprecedented political credibility for them across the country.
They are no longer seen merely as militant nationalists. They are viewed as heroic martyrs fighting for Indian democracy.
So when the emergency finally ends in 1977 and elections are called, this massive credibility translates into a staggering political merger.
The Janasangh makes the ultimate sacrifice. They completely dissolve their own party identity and amalgamate into the Janata Party.
which is this massive, unwieldy coalition of socialists, farmers' parties, and former Congress members.
They win the election, and suddenly the Hindu nationalists are walking the halls of national power.
It was their greatest triumph to date. But Jaffrelot titles his chapter on this era The Impossible Assimilation.
Because that ticking time bomb of ideological purity that we discussed earlier finally detonates.
And it destroys the entire government. You were talking about the dual membership crisis.
I am.
Explain the mechanics of this, because it is the linchpin that brings the whole Janata experiment crashing down.
Well, the secular and socialist elements within the ruling Janata Party quickly realize that the former Jana Sangh members have a massive unfair advantage.
They have the deeply disciplined, highly motivated RSS cadre working for them on the ground.
Right. So a leader named Chan Singh decides to weaponize the concept of secularism to neutralize his rivals.
He formally demands that all ex-Jana Sangh members renounce their dual membership.
He argues very publicly that you cannot be a minister in a secular democratic political party and simultaneously swear allegiance to a theocratic exclusionary organization like the RSS.
It is a brilliant political trap. He puts them in an absolutely impossible position.
Choose the immense political power you hold right now, or choose your ideological mothership.
It was the ultimate test of the movement's priorities. And what does the RSS do?
Well, the Gandhian leader, JP, actually pleads with the RSS leadership to just officially open its doors to non-Hindus.
Just to prove to the nation that they are merely a cultural organization and not a communal one.
It would have saved the government. But the RSS flatly, unequivocally refuses.
They prove their absolute, enduring commitment to cultural exclusivism.
They decide they would rather lose the national government than compromise their core identity.
So the ex-Jana Sangh members refuse to leave the RSS, the socialists pull their support, the Janata Party violently fractures.
The government collapses in chaos, and Indira Gandhi comes roaring back to power.
It was a catastrophic political failure. Burned by the failure of moderation, the movement retreats into the wilderness. They regroup.
And as we transition into the 1980s, they prepare to abandon compromise.
We are in 1980. The Janata experiment is dead and buried. The Hindu nationalists form a brand new political vehicle, the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP.
Yes.
Now, logic would dictate that after the RSS collapsed the government to maintain their purity, the newly formed BJP would come out swinging with hardcore militant Hindu nationalism.
But they don't do that at all.
No, it is one of the great ironies. The new BJP tries desperately to hold on to the moderate centrist legacy of the failed Janata Party.
Under Atal Bihari Vajpayee, they adopt an initial platform of Gandhian socialism and what they call positive secularism.
They try to project a highly moderate, reasonable image to appeal to the broad middle class.
And this strategy completely, utterly flops.
An unmitigated disaster at the polls. In the 1984 national elections, the BJP is functionally wiped out.
They're reduced to just 2 seats in the entire national parliament.
2 seats. The RSS leadership is furious.
They heavily criticize this moderation as dangerous revisionism. They argue that diluting the core ideology only alienates their own highly trained cadres.
Without actually winning over any new centrist voters who just vote for Congress anyway?
Exactly. So the strategy of moderation is dead in the water.
But Jaffrelot points out that the BJP didn't just decide to become militant in a vacuum.
The entire political context begins shifting dramatically in the 1980s.
Creating an environment where a return to militancy wasn't just possible, it was highly viable. What fundamentally changes in the country?
The core change is that secularism, which under Nehru was an unbreakable norm, begins to visibly erode.
And Jaffrelot places a significant amount of the blame for this erosion squarely on Rajiv Gandhi's Congress Party.
Yes, Congress, desperate to hold on to different voting blocs, begins blatantly manipulating communal themes for short-term political gain.
The book spends a lot of time on the Shah Bano controversy. Let's really unpack this.
It is absolutely foundational for the rise of the BJP in the 1980s. Shah Bano was an elderly Muslim woman who was divorced by her husband.
And she went to the courts to seek alimony, right?
Yes, and eventually the Supreme Court of India ruled in her favor, granting her the right to financial support.
Okay, seems straightforward. But Orthodox Muslim leaders protested vehemently.
They claimed that the Supreme Court's ruling violated Islamic personal law regarding marriage and divorce and constituted an attack on their religious freedom.
And how did Rajiv Gandhi react?
Fearful of losing the massive Muslim voting bloc in upcoming elections, he used his overwhelming parliamentary majority to pass a new law.
a law that effectively overturned the Supreme Court's secular decision, thereby appeasing the Orthodox clerics.
Exactly.
Okay, I want to pause here and put myself in the shoes of the average middle-class Hindu voter in the mid-1980s. How does this look to them?
It looks like a massive double standard.
Right. I'm watching the government, the government that always tells me it is strictly secular, suddenly use its power to bypass the Supreme Court just to appease a minority religious group.
You have articulated the exact psychological sentiment that the RSS and the BJP weaponized.
They looked at the Shah case and shouted from the rooftops, "Look, the so-called secular state is a fraud."
Secularism is just a mask for minority appeasement and reverse discrimination against Hindus.
It is the perfect validation of their oldest argument.
It completely legitimized the Hindu nationalist discourse in the eyes of the middle class.
And this wasn't happening in isolation. At the same time, there was a terrifying rise in violent Sikh separatism in Punjab.
And there were highly publicized mass conversions of low-caste Hindus to Islam in the South, funded allegedly by foreign money.
We are right back to step one of Jaffrelot's sociological blueprint: stigmatization.
The environment has provided the perfect threatening other again.
It triggers a massive, renewed sense of Hindu vulnerability, the feeling that Hindus are under siege in their own country.
Recognizing this immense opportunity, the RSS leadership unleashes the VHP to go on the absolute offensive.
And this offensive centers entirely on one specific piece of geography, Ayodhya.
This is the genesis of the Ram Janmabhoomi campaign.
The movement to build a grand temple dedicated to Lord Ram on the exact site where the Babri Masjid currently stood.
Because they firmly believed that spot was the physical birthplace of the deity.
To drive this campaign, the VHP recruits a new class of leaders that Jaffrelot calls modern gurus.
Religious figures who combine traditional, unquestioned spiritual authority with highly sophisticated, modern political activism.
They step out of their ashrams and into the political arena. They launch a masterclass in ethno-religious mobilization.
The sheer logistical sophistication of this mobilization in 1989 is just staggering.
They don't just hold angry political rallies in capital cities, they invent entirely new, highly participatory rituals.
Yes, they launch a program called the Ram Shila Pujan.
How did that work?
They issue a call to action asking every village across India to consecrate a single brick, wrap it in saffron cloth, and physically transport it to Ayodhya.
Think about the tactile brilliance of that. Suddenly, a poor peasant in a remote village in southern India feels a direct, tangible connection to a massive political campaign happening 1,000 miles away.
It is brilliant spatial symbolism, and this physical mobilization is perfectly timed with a media revolution.
The state television network begins broadcasting a wildly popular serialized version of the ancient epic, the Ramayana.
For weeks, the entire country is steeped in the mythology, the iconography, and the heroic narrative of Lord Ram.
The ground is perfectly fertilized, and then the BJP president, L.K. Advani, launches the Rath Yatra.
He embarks on a massive political procession, driving across the country in a Toyota truck that has been heavily modified to look like an ancient mythological chariot.
It is political theater on an epic scale. The chariot is tracing a sacred geography across the map of India.
And by doing so, it creates what sociologists call an imagined community. It unites disparate Hindus by giving them a shared devotion to a symbol.
And crucially, it transcends the rigid caste barriers that usually dictate Indian politics. Because whether you are a Brahmin or a Dalit, you are united as devotees of Ram.
But there is a profoundly dark side to this strategy, and Jaffrelot is unflinching in his analysis of it.
Right. This kind of mass emotive mobilization deeply polarizes society, and rapid polarization frequently leads to violence.
The processions frequently created a volatile atmosphere that sparked devastating communal riots between Hindus and Muslims.
Most notably, the horrific Bhagalpur riots in 1989.
Yes.
And this is where Jaffrelot drops a statistical observation that made me stop reading and just stare at the page.
This is a shocking statistic.
In the 1989 national elections, the BJP strategy pays off massively. They jump from that humiliating 2 seats all the way to 88 seats.
But Jaffrelot points out a chilling correlation.
47 of those 88 seats were won in constituencies that had recently been affected by communal riots.
It is a stark, undeniable correlation. The strategy of aggressive polarization had a direct, measurable, and highly profitable electoral dividend.
Violence solidified the Hindu voting bloc.
The mobilization was a massive success.
But as we move into the 1990s, Jaffrelot argues that mixing religious fervor with militant street politics created a raging fire that the BJP leadership could no longer control.
Because you fundamentally cannot build a permanent, stable political platform on a state of perpetual fever-pitch agitation.
The movement runs into a sociological wall. The 1990s in India are defined by an intense sociological battle that Jaffrelot neatly summarizes as Mandir versus Mandal.
Okay, I'm going to need you to unpack this because a listener might be confused. We've been talking about religion and temples. Why are we suddenly talking about affirmative action?
Right, Mandir obviously means temple, referring to the Ayodhya movement. But what is Mandal, and why was it such an existential threat?
Mandal refers to the Mandal Commission. In 1990, the Prime Minister, V.P. Singh, abruptly announced the implementation of the Mandal Commission's recommendations.
This policy granted massive, sweeping affirmative action, right?
Specifically reserving a huge percentage of government jobs and spots in public universities for the other backward classes, or the OBCs.
Meaning the vast swath of lower and middle castes who historically had very little representation in the state bureaucracy.
Precisely. This policy was an earthquake. Suddenly, the lower castes are gaining immense political consciousness and tangible economic power.
And the upper caste Hindus, who form the absolute core base and leadership of the BJP and the RSS, are utterly terrified by this sudden OBC advancement.
It threatens their historic dominance over state jobs and education. So how does the BJP respond to this caste-based earthquake?
They desperately double down on the Mandir agitation.
They realize a terrifying mathematical truth. If the Hindu electorate divides and votes along caste lines, the upper caste BJP will be permanently numerically crushed.
But if they can elevate religious identity over caste identity, if they can unite all Hindus in a frenzy around the Ram temple, they can neutralize the Mandal divisions.
They're using religion as a heavy blanket to smother the fires of caste division. Don't look at your caste, don't look at the job reservations, look at the temple.
It was a strategy of distraction and unification. But by doubling down, the religious agitation took on a chaotic life of its own.
The VHP and an increasingly militant youth auxiliary called the Bajrang Dal are now the ones driving the narrative on the ground, and they are impatient.
Which culminates in the events of December 6, 1992.
The demolition of the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya. Hundreds of thousands of highly agitated activists gather at the site.
The situation rapidly spirals completely out of the control of the moderate leaders, and the 16th century mosque is physically torn down to the ground by the mob.
Now, senior BJP leaders were physically present on the stage watching this happen. But Jaffrelot points out that this cataclysmic event actually overwhelmed the BJP's attempts to look like a responsible, moderate political party.
The militant grassroots basically seized the steering wheel and drove the car off the cliff.
Yes. And Jaffrelot offers a brilliant, highly paradoxical insight about the destruction of the mosque. He argues that by physically destroying the mosque, the movement actually deprived itself of its most powerful unifying symbol.
Because the threat is gone, the physical structure they spent a decade rallying millions of people against is literally dust. You can't agitate against a vacant lot.
Exactly. While the demolition certainly created a powerful cult of martyrdom for the hardcore activists, you simply cannot sustain a long-term electoral strategy purely on the memory of a demolition.
The instrumentalist strategy of ethno-religious mobilization had reached its absolute logical limit.
And we see the political backlash almost immediately. In the 1993 state assembly elections, which the BJP expected to sweep, they suffer major unexpected defeats.
Because the inherent limitations of their strategy were brutally exposed. The OBC voters, who were highly alienated by the BJP's obvious upper caste image, deserted them.
In the crucial state of Uttar Pradesh, lower caste and Dalit parties formed pragmatic alliances and defeated the BJP at the ballot box.
Furthermore, Jaffrelot notes that in states where the BJP had actually been governing, like Madhya Pradesh, they suffered from poor administrative governance.
And intense internal factionalism, what he terms groupism.
So the highly disciplined, ascetic RSS cadres, once they got a taste of real political power and patronage, started fighting each other over the spoils.
Human nature prevailed over ideological discipline. So Jaffrelot concludes his May 1996 text on a highly skeptical note.
He looks at the data and questions whether the BJP is destined to remain merely a mega-regional party.
He suggests they might be permanently limited by their narrow upper caste base and their structural inability to solve the Mandel problem.
But history obviously did not stop in 1996. And to his immense credit as a scholar, Jaffrelot didn't stop analyzing it.
We have to bring in a crucial update from Jaffrelot's later 2024 writing.
Because it is an undeniable fact that the BJP did not remain a mega-regional party. They achieved absolute, unprecedented national dominance.
So based on Jaffrelot's framework, how did they finally break through that massive OBC ceiling that stopped them cold in 1993?
They found the perfect once-in-a-generation synthesis in one man, Narendra Modi.
Jaffrelot analyzes the 2014 rise of Modi as essentially a counter-revolution. The urban upper-caste middle class had spent a decade chafing under coalition governments that heavily favored lower-caste assertiveness.
They desperately needed a political vehicle to reassert their control, but they knew the math.
If they ran a traditional upper-caste candidate, they would lose the massive OBC vote all over again.
Exactly. Modi solved the central paradox of the movement. He offered what Jaffrelot calls a plebeian face.
Modi himself comes from an OBC background, a lower caste. This authentic identity allowed him to bypass the historical resentment and appeal directly to the very lower caste voters who had angrily rejected the BJP in the 1990s.
But simultaneously, he is a pure, unadulterated product of the RSS. He spent his entire adult life being formed within the Sangathanist network.
He holds a deeply orthodox, socially conservative Hindu nationalist ideology.
It's the ultimate political alchemy. He perfectly satisfies the upper caste desire for rigid ideological purity and muscular nationalism, while totally bypassing the caste barrier with his own personal identity.
Yes. By effectively mobilizing Hindus via religion, polarizing the electorate against perceived threats, and leaning heavily on his own immense personal charisma, Modi successfully neutralized the caste divisions that had plagued the movement for decades.
Under his leadership, the Sangathanist model finally fused completely and seamlessly with state power.
The ideological network and the apparatus of the state became deeply intertwined, resulting in an era of unprecedented dominance.
But also, as Jaffrelot notes, an era marked by increasing state vigilantism and democratic backsliding.
Okay, let's pull all the way back and wrap our arms around this massive journey. We have traversed over 130 years of history.
We have seen Jaffrelot's three core sociological strategies at work: stigmatization and emulation. The incredible psychological mechanism where they perceived a threat, felt vulnerable, secretly copied the enemy's strengths, and claimed it was an ancient Vedic tradition.
Ethno-religious mobilization, taking sacred symbols like the Ram Temple and weaponizing them to bypass rigid caste barriers and unite millions in the streets.
And Sangathanist organization, the patient, generational building of an ascetic, highly disciplined army of local cadres.
We watched it evolve from the 19th century intellectual socio-religious reform of Dayananda's Arya Samaj through the hardline ideological codification by Savarkar.
Through the organizational genius of Hedgewar's RSS, the pragmatic political compromises of the Janasang, the explosive, violent mass mobilizations of the 1980s, all the way to its dominant 21st century reality where the network and the state are one.
It is an incredible, intricate, architectural blueprint of an ideology.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought that builds on Jaffrelot's work, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
What's that?
Jaffrelot showed us that to build this imagined community over the course of a century, it required immense, grinding physical effort. It required thousands of physical shakas, young men actually gathering in dusty fields at dawn to march.
Right, and it required physical rituals, consecrating actual bricks in southern villages and driving an actual truck disguised as a chariot across the physical roads of India.
But we live in a very different era now. We live in the era of WhatsApp, of algorithmic radicalization, of instant frictionless digital echo chambers.
That's completely true.
How does the strategy of stigmatization and emulation change when an imagined threat doesn't need a charismatic politician to give a sweaty speech in a village square?
What happens when a rumor of a threat or a doctored video of a riot can be broadcast to 1 billion smartphones in a matter of seconds?
Does this new digital technology finally perfect the Hindu nationalist strategy of instant emotional mass mobilization, or does it do something else entirely?
Does it make the movement dangerously uncontrollable, creating a digital mob that even the highly disciplined ascetic network of the RSS can no longer steer?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep exploring, keep reading, and always keep questioning the hidden structures of political identity.